Okay, guys, today we're going to be looking at the Enlightenment and what the Enlightenment was, and to get a good feel for some of the stuff that we've been working on in class. So, hopefully, this presentation is going to clear up a lot of things for you. So, with that being said, let's begin with talking about the Enlightenment. Just like we always do, we want to make sure that there are a couple things that we can answer before we move on. And that, of course, are going to be these learning objective questions. If you need to, you can stop the video at this point and jot these questions down, or you can refer back to them at the end and make sure that they are answered. Just to read through them real quick. What was the Enlightenment? How did the ideas of John Locke and Isaac Newton influence intellectuals of the Enlightenment? What were some key ideas of the philosophies? How did the new ideas lead to new social sciences? Describe the ideas of Rousseau in the late Enlightenment. Describe Wollstonecraft and her ideas for women. What was the social world of the Enlightenment like? And what was the change in the Christian religion during the Enlightenment? So, again, if you need to pause the video to write these down, you can. Otherwise, we're going to move on and we're going to get to our first heading, which is going to be called The Path to the Enlightenment. Two key figures here that you see pictured are Sir Isaac Newton and John Locke. Both of these guys are going to play major roles. Just to give you a quick definition of what the Enlightenment was, it was an 18th century philosophical movement of intellectuals who were impressed with the achievements of the scientific revolution. They hoped that by using the scientific method, they could make progress towards a better society. So there you go. There's your definition for the Enlightenment. Some common words that these guys are going to use, words such as reason, natural law, hope, and progress were common words to the thinkers of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was especially influenced by the ideas of these two guys, Isaac Newton and John Locke. To Newton, the physical world and everything in it was a giant machine. And because Newton had discovered natural laws that govern the physical world, the intellectuals of the Enlightenment are going to try to follow his lead and cover the natural laws that govern human society as well. John Locke's theory of knowledge also greatly affected the 18th century intellectuals. Remember that Locke believed that everyone was born with blank minds and they were molded by their experiences. This is called the tabula rasa, and it's spelled Tabula-Rasa. But he's saying that we are influenced and molded by our experiences. And he believed that if environments were changed and people were exposed to the right influences, people could be changed and a new society could be created. And that is what John Locke believed in. So one of the questions you want to ask yourself is that first learning objective question. How did the ideas of Isaac Newton and John Locke influence the intellectuals of the Enlightenment? Moving on to our next heading, the philosophies and their ideas. And you're going to see a few guys pictured here. And you're definitely going to want to write these names down and write down these things as we go through them, and make sure that you've got a good understanding about each one of these guys and some of the things that were going on during this period and some of the things that they wrote. So, most of the intellectuals of the Enlightenment were known by a French name, which is called the philosophy, which you see up at the top of the slide here. To the philosophies, the purpose of philosophy was to change the world. We saw a spirit of rational criticism that was to be applied to everything, including religion and politics. There were three French philosophers, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Diderot. They dominated Enlightenment thought during this period. Montesquieu's most famous work was known as The Spirit of Laws. And this is Montesquieu. It was published in 1748, and this work was a study of governments. Montesquieu tried to use the scientific method to find the natural laws that govern the social and political relationships of human beings. He identified three basic kinds of governments, and you definitely want to write these down. He said there were republics, despotism, and monarchies. In his study of the English monarchy, he identified three branches. And of course, these are the same three branches within our government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. So he comes up with those three branches of government. He said the government should function through a separation of powers, which we have in our government today. And in this separation, the three branches should be able to limit and control each other in a system of checks and balances, which is exactly how our government works. By preventing any one person or group from gaining too much power. So that's what checks and balances would actually do. This system, he said, provided the greatest freedom and security for the state. Montesquieu's works were translated into English and are definitely going to be a huge influence on our Constitution. And that was all about Montesquieu. The other guy that you see pictured here is a guy named Voltaire. Voltaire is going to write many pamphlets, novels, plays, letters, essays, and histories, which is going to bring him a lot of fame and wealth. He was especially well known for his criticism of Christianity and his strong belief in religious toleration. He believed in an idea called deism, and deism is this word that you see down here at the bottom, D-E-I-S-M. You definitely want to know what it is. This was an 18th century religious philosophy based on reason and natural law. Deism was built on the ideas of Sir Isaac Newton. In a deist view, God is the mechanic and he created the universe. And the universe was like a clock that God had created and set it into motion and allowed it to run without his interference according to its own natural laws. And that is the idea of deism. The next guy that we're going to discuss is the guy that you see here, and that is Diderot. Diderot was a writer who's going to study and read in many subjects and languages. His most famous contribution to the Enlightenment was the encyclopedia, which, of course, some of us still use today. His original encyclopedia was a 28-volume collection of knowledge that he edited, and the purpose of the encyclopedia was to change the general way of thinking. Many of his articles attacked a lot of religious superstition and supported religious toleration. Other articles called for social, legal, and political improvements that could lead to a more tolerant and humane society. The encyclopedia was sold to doctors, clergymen, teachers, lawyers, and helped to spread the ideas of the Enlightenment. And that was Diderot, the author of the very first encyclopedia. One of the things you want to ask yourself after hearing these things about Montesquieu, Diderot, and Voltaire is that how did the ideas of Newton affect religious beliefs in the 18th century? So again, how is Newton going to influence all of this, and how has he influenced these guys that we just discussed? Let's move on to our next topic. And this is going to be how the Enlightenment is going to move us towards a new social science. And the philosophy's belief that there are natural laws that govern human society led to the development of social sciences. And of course, these are areas such as economics and political science. Some groups were called the physiocrats. The physiocrats believed that if individuals were free to pursue their own economic self-interest, that all society would ultimately benefit. And that's sort of how our economy is set up today. And the guy that you see pictured here is a guy named Adam Smith. Adam Smith believed in a concept called laissez-faire. And laissez-faire is a French word meaning to let the people do what they want. The best statement of laissez-faire was made by Adam Smith in the work called The Wealth of Nations, which you see written on this slide. Smith believed that the government should not interfere in economic matters, and they should stay out of it. He believed that government should only have three basic roles, and you need to know these three basic roles. Government's responsibility should be to protect society from invasion, so provide an army, defend the citizens from injustice by giving us the police and all the other governmental agencies that do provide um, justice for us, and keeping up certain public works such as roads and canals. So those were the three basic roles that government should have according to Adam Smith. Another guy that you see pictured here is Cesare Beccaria. By the 18th century, most European states had developed a system of courts to deal with crime. Punishments, though, for these crimes were pretty cruel, and we've talked about some of these things before. It was believed that extreme punishments were needed in order to keep people from actually committing crimes, and of course, this was the main way that they tried to deter crime during this period. Beccaria, though, is going to argue that these punishments should not be cruel, and that if you did them, that it wasn't necessarily going to stop people from committing crimes. Beccaria also is going to oppose the idea of capital punishment, where you put someone to death. So Beccaria, of course, is attacking this traditional way of handling crime by arguing against it. So one question from this slide that you definitely want to ask yourself is, what roles did Adam Smith believe that the government should and should not have? And we just discussed those a few minutes ago. Let's look at our next topic, which is going to involve the later Enlightenment. By the late 1760s, there were a new generation of philosophies. We talked about this first generation, but now we're looking at a new group of philosophies that are going to emerge. One of them is going to be the guy that you see pictured here, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau is going to write a book called Discourse on the Origins of the Inequality of Mankind. Rousseau is going to argue that people had adopted laws and government in order to protect their property. And in this process, they had become enslaved by government. He's also going to publish another work which was called The Social Contract. And in The Social Contract, Rousseau is going to explain the idea of what the social contract was. He said, through a social contract, an entire society agrees to be governed by its general will, meaning they're going to do what the people want. Individuals who wish to follow their own self-interest must be forced to abide by the general will. So what the people want is basically what Rousseau is saying should be found in the social contract. Unlike many Enlightenment thinkers, Rousseau believed that emotions as well as reason were important to human development. He sought a balance between emotions and reason. And this was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So again, what was Rousseau's concept of the social contract? How did he view it, and what did he think needed to be done? Let's look at the next one. The next topic will be the rights of women during the Enlightenment. And by the 18th century, female writers began to express their ideas about improving the condition of women. And one of them is going to be the lady that you see pictured here, Mary Wollstonecraft. She's going to write a book called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And in that book, she is going to make or identify two problems that many women were facing during that period. She's going to argue that if a government is based on the arbitrary power of monarchs was wrong, which the argument against monarchs is going to come out during this period. A monarch, in case you do not know, is king or queen. Then she's going to say the power of men over women was equally wrong. So if we're going to be against absolute control or absolute government, which is what a monarch would be, then how can men have control over women in the same way? The other argument is she's going to argue that the Enlightenment was based on the idea of reason in all human beings. And because women have reason, then they should be entitled to the same rights as men. Okay, you definitely want to make sure you know these two arguments of what she was arguing for. Make sure you've written those down, and let's look at the social world of the Enlightenment. The social world of the Enlightenment is going to begin really with the aristocrats and the upper class, because a lot of peasants were not really concerned with the Enlightenment and really didn't know what the Enlightenment was. It's going to be the upper class and the aristocrats who are really going to understand the Enlightenment. The other thing that's going to help push the Enlightenment was going to be the idea of publishing and people being able to read for the first time. You see that begin to grow during the 18th century, so during the 1700s. This is going to help spread the Enlightenment with the development of newspapers and magazines for the general public. The first daily newspaper was printed in London in 1702. So by the 1700s, people started getting newspapers for the first time. The Enlightenment ideas were also spread through the salon. The salons were usually elegant drawing rooms of the wealthy upper class, and guests would come and gather in these salons and discuss the ideas of these famous Enlightenment philosophies. The salons would bring writers and artists together with the aristocrats, government officials, and wealthy middle class people. Now, the women who actually hosted the salons were in a position to sway political opinion and influence literary and artistic taste as well, because they were present while these things were being talked about. So that was the social world of the Enlightenment. Let's finish up with religion of the Enlightenment, or in the Enlightenment, excuse me. Although many philosophies are going to attack Christianity, most Europeans were looking for a different way to view Christianity, maybe one that would have more of a deeper personal devotion to God. One of the guys that's going to sort of help change a lot of this is the guy that you see pictured here, John Wesley. John Wesley was an Anglican minister, and he preached to the masses usually in open fields. I'd have these huge sermons out in the middle of these fields, and he appealed especially to the lower classes. And his sermons often caused people to have conversion experiences. Many of these converts joined Methodist societies in which they helped each other do good works. So, in this way, the idea of Methodism, which you see up here on the slide, gave lower and middle class people a sense of purpose and community. Whereas, some of the other religions were catering mainly to the upper class, this religion is going to cater to the lower class. And because of that, it's going to give them a sense of purpose and community. It proved that the need for spiritual experience had not been eliminated by the 18th century search for reason. And so John Wesley is going to play a major role in sort of changing Christianity and applying that to the lower class. So one question you would ask is, how does Methodism prove that the need for spiritual experience had not been eliminated in the 18th century? And of course, John Wesley is going to do that. Okay, that's going to do it for the Enlightenment. Make sure that you have taken very good notes and you have written down and listened to this as thoroughly as you can. Go back and let's look at those learning objective questions real quick, and make sure that these learning objective questions are written down and answered. And that is going to do it for the Enlightenment, and I will catch you guys on the next one.